Ever wish you could, like, I don't know, get inside the head of, like, a brilliant strategist from history?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, today we're going back in time to ancient China.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we're going deep into Sun Tzu's Art of War, or at least some really interesting commentary on it.
It's amazing how stuff written so long ago can still be relevant today, even outside of, war and stuff.
Totally. It's like a cheat sheet for, like, any kind of conflict, outsmarting your opponent.
Yeah, totally.
But for those who might not know, who exactly was this Sun Tzu guy?
So Sun Tzu was this Chinese general, strategist, philosopher, all that. He lived during a very chaotic time, the Zhou dynasty, to be exact.
So, like, a tough time to be giving advice on leadership and stuff.
Exactly. But that's what makes his insights so valuable, right? I mean, he was writing from experience, seeing firsthand how power and conflict work. The Art of War was basically his guidebook for not just surviving, but winning in crazy times.
And it's still studied today. That's kind of wild.
Hmm.
So what's the main takeaway? Like, what was the core of his thinking?
Sun Tzu believed the ultimate goal is to beat your enemy without even fighting a battle.
Whoa. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you win without fighting?
That's where his idea of Cheng and Qi come in. It's about the balance between the orthodox and the unorthodox.
Okay, I think I get it. So, like, what does that actually mean?
Okay, so Cheng is your straightforward approach, the tactics you would expect, but Qi is about surprise, the stuff that throws your opponent off guard. Sun Tzu said the real skill is blending these two, always adapting, always keeping your opponent guessing.
So be unpredictable. Use what's expected and what's not.
Yes, exactly. Imagine a river, right? It flows around a boulder, always adapting, always finding the easiest path. It's fluid, responsive, and it always gets where it's going. That's Cheng and Qi. Be like water.
I like that. Be like water. So this applies to more than just, like, actual battles, right? Like, this could be a business deal or even just dealing with a difficult person.
100%. Sun Tzu would say being predictable makes you an easy target. And speaking of being vulnerable, one of his most famous sayings is about truly knowing yourself as well as you know whoever you're up against.
You're talking about know yourself, know your enemy. Isn't that, like, super basic strategy?
Yeah, but it's harder to actually do, right? You need to know your own strengths and weaknesses, but also theirs.
It's like in a game where you realize your opponent has your strategy completely figured out.
Exactly. That's why Sun Tzu was all about gathering intel, analyzing the other side's moves, figuring out what makes them tick.
Okay, but how do you really know your enemy? Short of, like, hiring a private detective, I mean.
Well, Sun Tzu really believed in spies, and not just one type, but 5 different kinds. Each one had a special job in giving you a full picture of your enemy.
5 kinds of spies. Tell me more.
So you've got your local spies hanging out in enemy territory, getting info from the ground. Then there are inward spies planted within the enemy ranks.
Like double agent?
Exactly. They spread chaos, bad information, and even mess with decision-making from the inside. Then there are converted spies, former enemies who've switched sides. They can give you really valuable info on their old buddies.
Okay, so spies on the ground, spies on the inside, spies who flip sides. Who else?
Okay, so there's also doomed spies. They're sent to spread fake info, and they often, well, they don't make it back.
Intense. Talk about dedication.
Yeah. And lastly, surviving spies, the ones you send in and get out, hopefully. They bring back firsthand intel.
It's wild how Sun Tzu knew how powerful information could be, even back then. It's
Yeah.
like he predicted espionage and intelligence agencies and all that.
Totally. And remember, this wasn't just about collecting info, but using it to mess with your opponent.
Yeah.
Deception was huge for Sun Tzu. He even said something like, make your enemy want the pretty thing that'll ruin him.
So you gather intel and then use it to, like, trick your opponent, lead them down the wrong path.
Exactly. Remember that story about General Cao Cao and his fight against Lu Bu? Cao Cao's army was super thirsty, so he got sneaky. He told everyone that, get this, heaven was on his side and was making the river flow backward.
No way. Did that actually work?
Totally did. Lu Bu's forces were spooked, thought it was some kind of miracle, and they took off. Cao Cao got a sweet victory.
Wow, that's next level mind games. Okay, so spies, deception, being adaptable. Anything else important for winning?
Knowing the terrain is key. And I don't just mean the physical landscape, but also like the lay of the land in whatever situation you're dealing with.
What do you mean the lay of the land? Can you give me an example?
So Sun Tzu talks about 9 types of ground, each with its own good and bad points. You've got dispersive ground where your forces are like scattered and demoralized. Then there's facile ground where it's easy to move your troops around. And then there's desperate ground. Think you're totally outmatched and there's nowhere to go.
So it's about knowing where you stand, what your advantages are, what you're up against.
Yep. Then you adapt your strategy. Take Han Jin, a brilliant general who came after Sun Tzu. He was facing this powerful enemy in a tight valley. Sun Tzu would call that serious ground.
Sounds like a trap. You'd be stuck, nowhere to move.
Exactly. But Han Jin, he used the terrain to his advantage, put his weakest troops out front, pretended to run, drew the enemy in deeper, then, bam, he unleashed his best fighters from hidden spots up high and crushed them.
That's amazing, turning a weakness into a strength.
Right. That's the power of understanding the terrain, whether it's a literal battlefield, a business deal, or even a personal problem. You got to analyze where you are, see the risks and opportunities, and change your approach to up your chances of winning.
This is making a lot of sense. But what about the leader in all this? What does Sun Tzu say about that?
Sun Tzu was big on a good general being absolutely essential to winning a war. A leader's personality, how they acted, could make or break an army. He said a general has to have wisdom, be sincere, kind, brave, and disciplined.
Those are some big shoes to fill. It's about more than just, like, fighting skills.
Yeah.
It's about character.
Right. And a general needs to inspire their troops, make them feel like they're united and fighting for the same goal. He knew that a small, well-led army could beat a bigger one that wasn't as together.
So it's like building that team spirit, that we're in this together feeling.
Exactly. Sun Tzu knew that what you do matters more than what you say. Lead by example, share in the tough times, reward your people. That's how you earn their respect.
It's like those modern leadership ideas, empathy, communication, building a strong team.
Absolutely. But Sun Tzu also talked about what not to do as a leader. Like, he warned about being impulsive, saying something like, a hothead gets captured.
So stay calm, think things through, don't let your emotions get the best of you.
Exactly. And he said being too careful or taking forever to decide on things meant you were probably doubting yourself and you'll miss your chance.
So find the balance. Be decisive, but not reckless. Careful, but not frozen by fear.
Exactly. A good leader needs to be able to switch things up, depending on what's happening on the battlefield, which is always changing.
It's interesting how these old leadership ideas are still true today, no matter what you're leading.
Totally. Sun Tzu just got people and how power works. One of his biggest lessons is about morale. He said an army's spirit is like a dam breaker. If it's strong, the army's unbreakable. But if it's weak, the whole thing will fall apart.
How do you build that kind of unbreakable spirit? Make your team super resilient.
Sun Tzu thought a leader had to create this feeling of shared purpose, like what they were doing was right and just. He said communication is key. Soldiers need to know why they're doing something. And celebrating those small wins, those really matter.
It's like celebrating the small victories to keep the momentum going.
Exactly. Don't forget to acknowledge and reward courage and loyalty. A little kindness or appreciation can go a long way. He wrote, "Happy campers will fight like hell."
So it's not just barking orders and expecting people to blindly obey. You have to create a culture of respect, trust, and support. Almost like Sun Tzu is way ahead of his time, advocating for like a more human-centered approach.
Totally. And that might be why his work is still relevant. He understood that real strength comes from the hearts and minds of your people, not just weapons and numbers.
This is really eye-opening. We've talked about spies, deception, understanding the situation, and being a good, adaptable leader. Sun Tzu had a very complex and insightful view of strategy. But before we wrap up, how do you think these ancient ideas apply to today's world?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how Sun Tzu would handle everything going on today. It's kind of crazy, but a lot of what he talked about is maybe even more relevant now.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it, right? We're bombarded with information 24/7. The whole world's connected. Things are changing so fast. It's like a battlefield. But instead of armies, it's ideas, economics, who has the most influence.
So you're saying, even though we're not literally at war with swords and stuff, strategy is still important.
Totally. Look at the business world. It's cutthroat. Everyone wants to be on top. Sun Tzu would tell them, you got to know your competition, know what they'll do next, and be ready to change with the market.
Disrupt or be disrupted. It's like that whole thing.
Exactly. Or even personal relationships, right? Think about how many fights happen because people aren't communicating well or they're misunderstanding each other or just not being cool. Sun Tzu's idea is about knowing yourself, knowing the other person, picking your battles, and trying to find a peaceful solution. That's huge in personal stuff, too.
It's true. Sometimes it's better to walk away from a fight. Or at least not make it worse.
Exactly. Remember how Sun Tzu said, be like water, go around the obstacles? That's like a metaphor for life, you know?
Damn.
We have to be flexible, willing to change our approach, and always look for the smartest way to get where we need to be.
This has been awesome. So for our listeners, if they want to be more strategic, what's the one big thing they should remember from The Art of War?
Hmm, that's a tough one. But I'd say it's this. Being prepared is everything. Always be learning, always be thinking strategically, and always be ready to adapt.
So it's not about memorizing a bunch of rules, it's more like having a game plan for dealing with challenges.
Exactly. Sun Tzu's work isn't just some ancient military textbook. It's like a guide to dealing with people and winning, even when the world feels totally unpredictable.
And the best part is that all this stuff is timeless. It's true whether you're in a board meeting, dealing with a personal problem, or even just playing chess.
Absolutely. So next time you're facing a challenge, big or small, channel your inner Sun Tzu. Step back, look at the situation, and ask yourself, what's the most strategic move here?
I love that. That's a great place to wrap up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Sun Tzu.
My pleasure. Always fun to talk about this stuff.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes you've already won before the battle even starts.